Peace and blessings. This is Mindbender, and you're now tuning in to this thing called life. Yeah.
Hello. This is D.
And this is Key.
From this thing called life. And today, that's all I can say. We have an absolutely amazing panel of Black women coming to you to discuss the phenomenal and newly released, soon to be actually available in hard copy, book entitled I Am That One Black Friend. Lessons from a magical unicorn. I know I got a couple of inquiries saying, say what? Huh? And I just told them, buy the book. Just buy the book. It'll explain everything you need to know. But I want to start out by saying that this phenomenal book that we will be discussing briefly, but we're going to be talking about life in general as that one Black friend, utilizing this book as the basis of the discussion, is none other than the author of the book, Cassandra A. Porter. And she has introduced me. I'm not sure if Key was, had already known the other two young ladies. We shared, I've seen their names on live feeds when we're all blinging out, but other than that, I finally got the chance to meet these phenomenal ladies. Miss Alfreda Singleton Smith, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
And Miss Janetta Coleman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to take the time now to allow each lady, Cassandra, if you would, I would like to save you for last. We'll start with Miss Alfreda. If you would just give a quick, introduction of yourself, and then we'll move to Miss Janetta. Then we'll have Miss Cassandra wrap that up, and then we're going to dive in head first.
All right. My name is Alfreda Singleton Smith. Thank you first so much for having me. I think this is a wonderful opportunity to talk about Cassandra's phenomenal book, but also to discuss other issues or concerns or just things that have popped up as we've read the book and then as we've gone through our own personal life journeys. I am recently retired as of July, so I'm trying to get to being in this retired life, which under COVID, it's not what I expected, but it's given me some other opportunities that I hadn't planned on. I have spent more than 40 years in the child welfare field in various in private organizations. And along that journey, I've had the opportunity to also delve into a lot of race related issues as it relates to children in foster care and kinship care, the disproportionality of children in the child welfare system, and also looking at just how those decisions are made through policy and how they're made in the field when children are removed and what people's values are based on. So that's pretty much what I've been doing in a nutshell for the past 40-some years.
Ooh, bless your missionary ministry, because that is truly a ministry.
Calling. Once I realized it was more than a job and it was a calling, it changed my life. So
yeah, absolutely.
Woo. Wow. We got some for real heavy hitters on this joint today. Miss Janetta.
Hi, thank you for having me, and thank you, Cassandra, for inviting me to be along on the panel. I'm so excited for you. And you know what? I actually had a cathartic moment driving to pick up my daughter from school. We'll dive into that in a minute. But I'm the president and owner of Montreal Partnerships and Events. We specialize in health and human service activities such as program evaluation, performance quality improvement, strategic planning, creation of new service lines. And we also do the production of conferences for professionals within the child welfare field or health and human services. I have worked in child welfare for over 23 years, which is how I met both Alfreda and Cassandra. And they're phenomenal ladies. But child welfare and advocating for children and families started way back. My parents were foster parents for 20 years as I was growing up. So I too saw a lot of that and learned early a lot of things about the child welfare system. And so it has tied itself into my entrepreneurship, which I've been doing for about 15 years now.
Wow.
Thank you for your missionary ministry. Because, and I say that, we joke, I said, and we kind of, chuckle about it. But when you think about the children and you think about how, what they do professionally and how it truly impacts these young people's lives, like whether or not it just kind of that's a show within itself. But thank you all.
Truly.
Because some of my dearest friends now have, coming up were in the foster care system. And had family members or friends who were a part of a household that had, children come into their homes. So I applaud you all for what you do, because it is a unsung profession. Truly. For real. That is truly an unsung profession.
And also looking at it from the perspective of the parents or, the people who do the fostering, who do the adopting, because those are some of the people who are in my life. And then, or to be a host to a child who, is going through something, as we well know. And it's
and the crazy
mind-blowing.
The crazy part, their professions fall right in line with this book.
Yes, absolutely. So, in getting to this book,
Miss Cassandra,
the floor is yours.
Well, good evening, everyone. And thank you to Key and Dee for welcoming me back. We have always had amazing conversations in this thing called life. And so, I'm thankful to be back. I am thankful that this is the first opportunity to promote my book that really was cathartic. It was a tough summer for our nation. It was tough. It was a tough summer. I think it was a tough summer for people of color. And I was needing to get all of that out. And so the book is just the outcome of needing to just get it out, needing to write, to vent, to scream, to cry, to really evaluate, how am I at 46 years old that one Black friend? Like, you don't have nobody else you can ask these questions of? And perhaps there are many others who are those magical unicorns, because we're all magical, but we're magical because we've had these experiences and because we've had just this life in this place, in this season. And so I am so thankful that my divas are with me. So if you have had the opportunity, and when you get the opportunity to read the book, now you have faces to put to the divas that are mentioned in the book, and just the blessing of community and having a tribe to go out to dinner and yes, be away from other responsibilities, but just to say, seriously, like, really?
Right.
So I am thankful for Alfreda and Janetta for walking this path today with me.
Absolutely. So I'm going to say, because that was, of course, actually what was going to be my first question, was what prompted you to go ahead and do this? And so when you talk about it being your release, I can very, very much so understand it. The style in which you did it was perfect. I love it. But I love how each thing segued into a life lesson or a lesson or an explanation of a lesson that we have to deal with, So how did you decide on the flow of this? I guess that needs to be the question. How did you decide on the flow of this?
So, so I always have to give credit, because it's literally probably one of maybe 3 times in my life I've listened to Mr. Porter, who told me years ago I needed to write a book. Y'all know. And really it was to validate the work I do in my training organization. And so his point was, when you go to conferences and when you speak, and, the keynote speaker always has a book, or, the keynote speaker is always promoting something that they wrote, you need to be like them. And I said, well, I don't really know what I would talk about except myself. And that's where the idea came from. I have an amazing is not word enough, mother, who is a teacher still, and was very intentional to spell out how I needed to move through life in an all-white environment growing up. And when I would get a lot of questions, and I'm sure we all got lots of questions this summer around, what do I do? How do I fix this? What do I do? How do I fix this? What can I read? And I'm thinking, well, your question is very simple, but the answer is a result of my lived experience and my lessons. And perhaps you don't exactly know all the things, at least that I went through. And I would suggest that most women of color or people of color in this country go through to be able to answer really complex questions in a very kind and reflective manner, because you're asking me something very complicated, but the answer is a result of a lot of experiences. And so I was trying to think through how to capture those experiences. And it's an everyday thing, whether you have a 4th grade daughter or a 14-year-old daughter or a 40-year-old daughter, the lessons are just everywhere. And
right.
And so that's where the idea came from, is really just thinking through, well, you have to understand that I am not just answering you politely because I read a book about this experience. Like, this is my life. So,
having been, that one Black friend for an entire family, that was always fun. It was definitely, to read your book, it was just like, yep, I remember that. And I remember having to readjust. But so I think I'm just going to kind of dive right into some of the things that we talked about, because there are some people who, even when I said it, they didn't necessarily understand it. So I guess because you had so many lessons in there. And I think at some point we have all had to do this, is when you talk about the code switching and letting them know that we are safe.
So just take a breath. Just take a breath, sis. So, one of the things that, as I was reflecting, one of the things that occurred to me is, even though I may have seen the lesson as a child, which is how it first came up. So my mother is a teacher. When she was teaching with her other Black colleagues, they interacted one way, versus when a white teacher came in the room, they acted a different way. And as a child, I didn't have the language around that, but I could observe that something was different. Well, fast forward to now, I'm in a working space, and I know everyone could probably attest to this. When you're in a working space and you're talking with a colleague who is of the same race or even of the same gender, there's a different dialect that happens versus when someone else walks in the room. And there's a lot of research behind that. There's a lot, and this wasn't about a research-based book. It's just, as a kid, my mind is making sense of, why are we talking different? Why do we have to be different in the presence of them?
And talk white.
and why does that feel different? And then once we're adults, it becomes, why are you talking white, or why are you talking like that? When I'm like, well, wait a minute, isn't this English? Like, what? so yes, and the lesson really is, we always, and when I say we, I'm talking about me as a Black woman. So if others take from the same lesson, then that's a blessing. We have to be the ones to make white people comfortable when we are in a space. So, just take a breath. Just take a breath. Just
take a sip of wine. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to say anything. It was your whole demeanor, your whole chin. We heard that. Just take a sip of wine. You'll be all right.
No, I want to say what I didn't say earlier was your journey as a child, going to the school your mother taught at, and being fortunate enough to go to that school because your mother is a part of that particular education system.
Yeah, that was her experience.
And and I read the book, because if you notice, I hadn't really said a whole lot of anything about the book prior to right now,
which was killing me, right?
Okay. But as I read your journey, I read my journey, and but the difference was our personalities are parallel yet perpendicular. Because you taught me that I'm passionate about some very interesting things, and I want to say, even as a child, like we said, you're not really sure as to what's going on in certain situations, but once you're older, you start to kind of get it. And I appreciate you telling our story, because it's not something that is easily articulated, especially when your parent is one of the educators. It's like you're under a microscope, this big, huge NASA-sized microscope, especially as one of very, very few Black educators at that particular school and in that particular school system.
Right. Right.
So it's one of those things where I was like, and I'm gonna be honest, there were moments I cried.
Aw. That's what Alfreda told me, and that's nothing but the Lord. That's there were moments I cried when I was writing.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
There were moments I cried. Yeah, but I'm not going to cry now because
yeah, I thank you because, like you said, sometimes you don't realize the things that are there. But anyway, I want to say first, I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name, Miss Alfreda. My name is Demetria, and people tear it up all the time. So please forgive me. I have a dear friend who spells her name like you, and she pronounces hers Alfreda. So please forgive me for mispronouncing your name. No, your mom and dad named you specifically Alfreda. So I want to apologize for that.
That's fine. It probably wasn't until I went to get my master's that I was released enough to be able to tell people it's not Alfreda, it's not Alfreda, it's Alfreda. But I appreciate you apologizing. Thank you so much. I think when you talk about it being cathartic, and I've known Cassandra and Janetta for a lot of years, I did not realize how close our stories intertwined. I grew up in Texas for probably about 4 years, had a lot of those same, not the same experiences, but the lessons were the same. And down to the teacher who was I was scared to death of that teacher, and I am now at an age where I finally said something to my mother, and she says, "Why didn't you ever say anything?" And I said, "I just didn't know I could say anything, but this was a teacher who was very demeaning. And I can remember going in her classroom and shaking just to be in there. And now that I think back at it, a lot of it was directed at the African-American students and the Mexican students, Black and brown children. It wasn't directed at the other children who were probably doing more than we were. We were just sitting in class and she would just single us out all day long. So when I read that part of it, that's when I cried, because of the fact that I finally had a name to put to that. And I was able to finally acknowledge it, acknowledge it for what it was. And then be able to release it. Because back then in the 7th grade, I didn't have the words for it, coming from a school system that was very insulated as an Army, going to Army schools and now being in a civilian school. I didn't know what that was going on. So I appreciate being able to read that in the book and being able to use that time to put that away, to kind of look at it, examine it, and say, okay, that was a lesson, learned it. I can put that away now. But I think the code switching also that Cassandra alluded to is also about protection. We don't let people see the real us, because if they did, they couldn't handle it. Would they like it? How would it change things? And so it's about not letting them see us, and also to protect us from, I have this one small thing that belongs to me, and I'm not going to let you see that. So that's just kind of my take on that.
My problem was I was not that quiet student. I was that vocal student that if you came wrong with our African American history, I was that student that was like, that's a hot crock, and would just go ahead and just say it, because we all know that history has been whitewashed. But being blessed enough to sit at the feet of my, great grandparents, and, who lived through these moments, to be the daughter of, a sharecropper, to be, you know, even though she was an educator, when she was coming up, my grandparents were sharecroppers. So there were a lot of different things that were in the history books, you know, because, you know, most of my family, and I'm sure a lot of you all can relate to it as well, you know, were military men and women, well, more men at that time.
Yeah.
So a lot of the pretty pictures of the war that we were taught, I was like, you know, I often let them know. Now that may have been how it was for y'all, for you all's a great grandfather, but it wasn't that pretty for mine, because mine was the one in the kitchen cooking for yours, acting like they were irrelevant and they didn't matter. And then, or you know, my uncle was the one that had to go ahead and make sure that your grandfather didn't get his head blown off. But then when we come back over here, my grandfather doesn't matter. He's just like, you know, the dirt that's being walked on while yours is being praised. So no, I'm not going, because the blood that runs through my veins is just as important as the blood that runs through yours. And, you know, being from Mississippi, being from the South, you know, dealing with that heavy duty Confederate base, it was, you know, I was, you know, not intimidated. But one thing that my father taught me, and Miss Janetta, I'm going to come to you in 2.2 seconds, because, you know, your introduction really kind of struck something with me. When, you know, he told me way back when, and I didn't understand it when I was little, but I understand it more now. He was like, do not ever let me hear you using your race to try to get ahead. And I was like, say what? He was like, let your work and your merit speak for you. And I was like, okay. But I didn't understand the depth of what he was saying at that moment, because I'm still, you know, 5th, 6th grade, not thinking about grown-up life, but it resonated. And so, Miss Janetta, while you were talking, you know, and giving your introduction, talking about dealing with, you know, these young people, you know, with your profession, how, you know, how parallel do you see a lot of what, and even with Miss Alfred, you know, Miss Alfreda, but how do you see what you deal with on a daily basis? How do you see the dynamics of like our education system, and how, you know, twisted, and how now people are woke, you know, everything is not necessarily accurate with all the wokeness, but at least people are becoming more aware of the missing history. So as you deal with these young people, as you know, they are starting to learn more about where we come from as a culture, how is that kind of, you know, helping, you know, when you're dealing with them, and then, you know, they're dealing with a lot of the things that was addressed in this book. Can you kind of help, you know, kind of address that for me a little bit?
Yeah. Well, in reading her book, you know, my experience and my feelings about it were a little bit different from what you described and what from Alfreda described. As I was reading it, I became tired, because I was like, oh, now I know why I'm so tired all the time. But I think it's because of the walk that I'm on as a mother. My children are 5 and 10. And so with my daughter, she's in 4th grade now. And so, you know, Cassandra's children are very close in age. She has walked ahead of me in some of the things that she talked about and described. As I was reading about, you know, Cassandra's experience in, you know, her elementary school, I actually became very angry, because I'm thinking, who's not advocating for her? Who's somebody should be there for her? You know, that's the piece going back to my upbringing of being an advocate for children and families all the time. And so I became exhausted in the reading, just, you know, recognizing everything that I do, but not having put a label or lesson to it. And then when you couple that with being a parent, I'm much more conscientious, and that takes a lot of energy. You know, as I talked about, you know, I had a cathartic moment as I was driving to school today to pick her up. And I don't know why it came up in my mind, but, you know, it's about when Cassandra is talking about how her mother was always at every game or every recital or, you know, band, you know, rehearsal that you were having. And in my mind, I was like, oh, so that's why my parents drove me to that particular cheerleading camp, because I was a cheerleader in high school, drove me to the cheerleading camp when everybody else, my white counterparts, because I was the only Black at the time, I was the only one whose parents drove them. Everybody else rode together. And it goes back to that idea of trust. Can you protect my child when I'm not around? I want to protect my child. And now I get why my parents were doing what they were doing. And I do the very same thing. You know, I'm at everything. I don't leave, you know, my daughter with anybody. I don't leave her at her gymnastics class. I'm there, you know, with her. And so it was just, oh, man. And so I'm very conscientious about the education system. My father is a retired educator and principal. My aunt was a teacher. And so I come from a line of educators. And, you know, a Black man in the education system is like a unicorn, a Loch Ness. You don't see them much, you know, you don't see them as much. And I watch him get put into a box a little bit. And Cassandra, you alluded to this in the book about being the person who has to come to the job and fix it. You know, he was the one that had to deal with all the quote unquote bad kids, you know, especially the African-American kids or white kids too, you know, come fix our problem. Why do we have to fix the problem? How come you couldn't fix the problem? Why do I have to be the fixer person? And then you get right into that, you know, and there needs to be an, you know, advancement. So yeah, it was a lot of things in this book. I was like, wow, I'm exhausted, I'm angry, and now I'm on fire. You know,
right.
I'm on fire.
Because you go from one end of the spectrum to fast forwarding into, I mean, what you just said was a perfect segue into the adulting aspect of being that unicorn.
Yes.
That, you know, okay, you got a whole puzzle that is just full of white puzzle pieces, and dead center is that one Black piece. Out of the whole puzzle, there is that one piece that is just dead center, that is Black. So when you have issues like the civil unrest that we are currently experiencing in the world today, it's like you find yourself being crushed by all of those puzzle pieces. All of those puzzle pieces are just coming in, and it's like, you're like, okay, look, don't make me just go completely dark on you. You know, and when I say dark, I mean, just turn the phone off, turn everything off.
Especially in the work environment, because you're there to work. So you have some tasks that you need to do that's not even the educating of your coworkers, or your coworkers who are texting, or your coworkers who are coming to talk to you because they don't want to talk to you in front of everybody, or like you have your job you have to do and the other stuff, because you're the one puzzle piece in the middle of the entire picture. And one of the things I shared, and this is just the world according to me, I can't speak for everyone, but I considered it a mission, no matter when I went into a division or into a department or into a space at a work environment, it was always going to be browner when I left than when I got there, because I was willing to fight the conversations in the hiring process of, well, they don't really seem like they're a good fit, or, you know, very kind of arbitrary conversations that happen when there's a candidate of color. And I'm not saying everyone has to do that. That was just the world according to me. I thought it was an opportunity if I'm in that type of position. because it is tiring to always be the only one. Like my 7th grader said to me the other day, which I didn't even realize because I hadn't paid much attention, and back to school doesn't look the same. And so we don't actually see all the classmates. And she says, "Mommy, do you know I'm the only Black girl in 7th grade?" I'm like, "No, you're not. There's so-and-so." And she's like, "Well, she didn't come back." And I'm like, "Well, no, what about so-and-so?" What? And I'm like, oh, like it didn't. Wow. And again, because some of the children are virtual and some of them are in person, it's just hard. It was hard. I missed that. It didn't even register. And that's a lot of work to always be the only. And so you're the only at work, you're trying to do your job, and then you have to be the resource for everybody. And then you have to be the safe space for everybody, or, you know, it's just, it is, to Janetta's point, it's exhausting. And there's, you know, when we were at the very beginning of the pandemic and they were talking about why people of color have all these comorbidities, and we have, you know, diabetes and this, and we have this and this, and we have hypertension. And I'm like, have you been Black lately? Like
that part. That part.
Of course we have hypertension.
Dealing with you is exhausting.
So when I first met Miss Cassandra, we were doing a radio show actually, and that's how we first met. But at the time, I was working for a construction company. And within my particular office of this construction company, there was me and 45 white men. So I want to say thank you on a lot of levels, because I think our conversations over the years, and then even just, you know, when you've talked about the racial equity and the diversity trainings. So in all areas of my life now, those are things that I absolutely, you know, people will be like, well, what do you know about her? And they'll be like, one of the things they'll always say is, she's one of those that's trying to fight for, you know, equity and inclusion and diversity and inclusion. Because again, when you talk about, and Ms. Janetta even said, you know, you're being tired and angry. And so I loved my job at the construction company. But daily, I was tired. I was angry. And even when I wasn't angry with them, which was almost all the time, when I wasn't angry at them, I was just like, is this day over yet? Like, if one more person comes to me and is just like, is it offensive if I say so-and-so and so? Well, why would you say it? If you have to ask me if it's offensive, why would you say it? So I also want to say, you know, thank you for that, because I promise you, if it hadn't been for you, I might not have had that job as long as I had that job. I'm just saying, there were some days you and I had some conversations and some glasses of wine, because it was like, I need to come and shop, and you just be like, come over. Because it got to a point where there were days where I was just like,
you needed that retail therapy.
And then my sister came to live with me. So it helped tremendously just to even get through all of that. But so, you know, again, thank you for retail therapy and for talking and for just being who you are and doing what it is that you do.
Okay, I have a question for everyone. And I know this book hit everyone differently. And I just want you to kind of, because you may already know which one it is, and you may not, but think about, out of the lessons of the book from our magical unicorn, what is your, I'll just say, I know we can't just always sum it up in one lesson, but what was that initial lesson that kind of jumped out at you most? Okay, Miss Alfreda just turned around and her eyebrows went up like,
well, there were just so many, you know. I think it would depend on what stage of my life I'm in at what time. Okay. I think the one, and I'm paraphrasing it, so don't hold me to the exact page and whatever, but just a feeling that I have to be responsible for making them feel better all the time. Making white people feel safe and better all the time. Particularly pushback mainly from white women. And that seems to have, if I look back at my career, mostly, that's when I've had the most challenges, whether it was working on my master's and having to deal with someone who was upset because I made the comment about the differences between that don't compare the struggles of African Americans to the struggles of Jewish Americans. And I said, because at any time you can take off your Star of David and nobody's going to know. I can't shed my color, okay? And she completely got mad and wouldn't talk to me anymore for the rest of the school, for the rest of our semester. And we were working together on a project where we were, what do you call it? Where we were proctoring a class and we would take turns going and getting the notes. I never got any more notes from that woman. Okay. To the time when I had a student, I was the MSW supervisor and she was my student, and she was there on a visit with the person from the School of Social Work who was her director. And she kept challenging me in front of him. And then from there, he pushed back and told her, this is not the person that you challenge. This is the person that knows more about adoption, foster care, anything than probably anybody in this state. And you shouldn't be, what's wrong? To the point where she then went back to the School of Social Work and asked for a new facilitator, a new supervisor, which they allowed her to do without telling me anything about it. I found out about it from her, came to get her things from her desk. So, and then to probably just recently working with people in my last job where I had to try to make people feel comfortable. And I will tell you, it kind of got to the point while COVID was horrible, and it still is horrible, when you talk about unintended gifts, the gift of being able to not be at work and work from home. So I didn't have to carry anybody. I didn't have to explain what was going on out in the world with the unrest and all of that, those things. I could just be at my desk, answer the phone, deal with my clients, make sure my 3 people were doing what they needed to do, and I didn't have to help save anybody. And that's how I rode my way on out to retirement. Had it, God knows, because if I had been there, I probably would not have made it to retirement. I probably would have been asked to leave. So that's kind of my thing, trying to always be everything for everybody. I had a supervisor once who would come in every morning to sit down and talk with me so I could help her feel better every day. She would, because, we have special powers, and it would be time for her to come in and sit down and talk and, and everything. And I'm like, you're the CEO. If you don't know, how do I know? So I think that that's been the lesson. When do I just get to be me and take care of me and the people that I need to take care of, and mentor the people that want to be mentored without having to worry about what I say, how that impacts them, and always having to put you first. And if not, then you're going to start crying. We get these tears and we get this backward stuff. So that's my lesson that I got out. And it was good to be able to read it and know it wasn't just me saying that.
Right. That reassurance, that validation of your feelings and everything that you've experienced.
Right. And being able to talk with Cassandra and Janetta about it, that's what lunches, dinners are, is that because there aren't safe places to talk in the field of social work, especially for African American women, very few men, just like in education, we had to create our own safe space to be able to do that.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
So I think when you talk about when she talked about blessings, like it is a blessing for me not to be where I was before and then where I was when COVID hit. Yeah. But I will say I hadn't even thought about it that way. So thank you, Miss Alfreda.
Well, you're welcome.
It was, it is a blessing that I'm not where at that job.
One of the things I always ask my children whenever something happens, and I've started with my grandkids, is, okay, so this thing happened. What's the blessing and what's the lesson? The lesson is you probably shouldn't have done that and you're not going to do it anymore. But what's the blessing that you get out of that?
I think that, yeah, because I hadn't looked at it like that, you know, even with, like I said, the construction company. I could not have been working at the construction company in today's climate.
Oh, no.
I couldn't. No. I know this. I know this in my soul and in my spirit.
Call from Marion County.
That's not even Marion County. That's Hamilton County. So, you know, they'd have been like, they wouldn't even.
They're not even going to let you call.
Yeah, one of the hands that had to even be like, Miss D, they came and got your sister because she went left and she done tried to tear up the whole office. So you might need to get somebody to come get her.
Y'all got that right hook of fellowship.
Thank you for no, literally, I'm very, very serious. We're laughing, but I'm very, very serious.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, because I didn't, because I was just sitting there saying I missed that job so much. But I know, and just listening to Miss Alfreda and everything that's going on in the world today, I know
that's not the
I couldn't have been there. No, I need more wine.
But now, Miss Janetta, and what about you?
I think the lesson in visibility or invisibility, being that one in the room and representing. Now, I'm a businesswoman and have been in business for myself for over 12, 15 years now. So a lot of times I am walking into the room as the only minority owner of a business, which surprises everybody every time when they figure it out. And I don't want to be just at the table. I'll be at the table with you, but I want my mic on. I'm not there to just be there for you and to represent diversity. I want my mic on, and working in business and doing minority women business enterprise, it is its own little bag of tricks, if you will. And Cassandra kind of alluded to it in the book, that, people are vying for only 8% of the budget. It's amazing to me how much you're asked to be at a table, but they're not really wanting your contribution. And I don't sit there and wait for you to ask for my contribution. I'm going to give it to you. That's the biggest lesson for me, was that piece right there. In addition to the mom stuff, because walking forward and making sure that your children are okay is, something else. I just had a conversation with my daughter just last night. She said, "Mommy, when people look at me at school, they look at me like they don't care about me." Now that hurt my heart. That's the kind of stuff that worries me. And that.
Okay, I'm going tomorrow. Let me know where we meet, because I'm going.
Girl, that's the kind of stuff that worries me. And that's when I started to read that unicorn part of mother that Cassandra was walking through. That's when my spirit got sad, because I know that there's so much more ahead of me in order to keep her intact, to keep her spirit intact, to keep her mental intact, to keep her self-worth intact. I can't sleep on the job. You can't sleep on the job. You have to be awake at every moment when it comes to your children and them being in an environment where they are the minority. It is a lot of exhausting work. So really it's kind of two, if you will, having the seat at the table. And Alfreda kind of alluded to it as well, because, we both work in child welfare. And so, if you look at social service agencies, most of them are headed by white men. There's white women, but most of them are headed by white men. And they're not headed by minorities, which is amazing, because the services, a lot of them, disproportionality, are minorities.
Okay, Key.
So I have to speak to our group, because there's a fourth, although there were far many before I was invited to be at the table with the Dining Divas. But I thought it was so interesting as I was processing through this, because I allude to it in the book about my mom and her coworkers who would go out to dinner every month. And because she was like the one Black teacher on the campus, all of her coworkers were white. So for a very long time, their group was, mom and like 6 white women. And I think eventually another Black woman came, and maybe another one after that. But they would go to Steak and Ale. That's how, old. Remember when Steak and Ale was around? And so I said to her as I was writing, and I was like, because she called them her Steak and Ale buddies. So her Steak and Ale buddies were amazing. They, still are Facebook friends with me, and had the most amazing bridal shower for me back in Houston. But that group never talked about race or racism. And it was so indicative of how many cross-racial relationships we have, but we never talk about oppression or racism, things that, not that we talk about it all the time when I get together with my divas, but it's a place to vent when we are together, to say, I'm in an organization where they hired me to be the CEO of the state, but then this is also going on, and y'all, am I crazy? Because there's nobody else I could talk to. Like, they didn't have that type of it was a really nice friendship, it seemed, because I think we can have cross-racial friendships and they be authentic. But I'm like, how do you have like real authentic cross-racial relationships and you're never talking about like ever? I don't know how that works. And I don't know, but I don't know.
But that goes to a lot of the things that this particular, because 2020 has been quite an interesting year of revelation. And it goes to those revealing underlying feelings of people that I'm not going to say you, but that I deemed as a friend. Now, I knew that a lot of them were acquaintances, but we'd always been cordial. And, we've had those race, conversations about race and, why, Blacks view certain things differently than whites. And, we were having those discussions well before 2020. But those microaggressions that were, and a lot of those things that were revealed in shared posts or, very subtle comments, a very politically correct posts that were structured to be politically correct, but you caught that undertone. I'll say it that way. There was a lot of revelation and a lot of deletion on my part, because if you cannot see my Blackness, I don't have time to coddle you and your, desire to remain quote unquote superior. I am not a minority. I am not inferior. And that's how it is, point blank, period. So you know, the feelings of so many of the people that I interacted with, you know, it was really disappointing, especially because of conversations we had actually had. And it's a blessing that you all have that safe space where you all are able to talk, be free, and just go from there. And that leads me, okay, do you know what your life lesson is? Because I'm going to say mine in a second if you don't know what yours is. Why are you looking at me like that?
I'm just listening to you, Sissy.
Do you know what your life lesson is? The one that kind of stood out? Because I'm going to tell you what mine is. And
I'm just going to say, I think because my experiences were a little bit different. I think for me, like all of it was because I could relate on every level and in every aspect. But for me, when you talked about parenting, and so I, we went on into this off air when you talked about being ever present for your child, for your children, and Miss Janetta, you're talking about being ever present. Like these people know who I am, and you know who I'm here for. Like, make no mistake. And because of where we live, so because my daughter was, she was that one, what they call it, what is it, the fly in the buttermilk or the fly in the ointment? That was my job. So even in today's society, and even in the things that we were doing, like she played tennis and she played the viola, and
she was the manager for the not rugby.
Yeah, she was the manager.
Rugby,
she was the manager.
Team.
She was the manager for the men's rugby team. So let me know, me and the coach, we had to get an understanding at some point in time. I thought D was gonna take him out at the knees, but that's another story. So. But when they were talking about, and again, I've been accused of being that helicopter parent. And so what I wanted, again, I'm saying to you, thank you, because for expressing, like, I understood in my own brain why I was there, but it wasn't something I was always able to articulate. But I'm like, I'm here because I need y'all to know who, and I need to know that she's safe. And I need y'all to know that if she's not safe, I'm coming for you. And I want y'all to see, I don't want it to be some vision out of the darkness. I want you to see who I am and know that I am here and know that she is here and know that she is, she's that one. But I also want to thank Miss Cassandra, because in the conversations that you have had with my daughter, I will say that my daughter, she's toned down certain things quite a bit, but she is one of those, she fights for diversity and inclusion. I mean, when her friends are around, it's a whole rainbow tribe thing going on, but she fights for that. And she'll look for a legal precedent if she has to, but she fights for it. But now she does it in such a way where she, because we've actually had those conversations where she was just like, Miss Cassandra said, so and so and such and such and so and so and such and such. So when they were coming at me and they were saying this and this and this, I just let them know, look, you can't do this A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And I'm just like, so Cassandra, even, we don't always, we pick our village for our children, and they talk about, it takes a village to raise a child, and other folks may not believe that, but I'm those, I have a village mentality when it comes to my daughter. And so I wanted to thank you for being a part of that village, because without even knowing it, like, she will pull out a whole Miss Cassandra conversation from the depths of somewhere, and I'll be like, when did you have a conversation? Where was I? I had to be there, but what happened? So I have to say thank you. And I have to say that, like I said, just the things that I've gleaned from your book, but being able to articulate who I am and why I am as her mom. So that one was one of the majors for me.
Okay, for me, what grinds my nerves and the lesson that was biggest for me was, and then because we're at a point where even though we're virtual, I still like to try to keep it as close to time as possible. And we do have one additional thing, but for me, the biggest thing was when we do the work, but they get the credit.
That's one of her complaints.
So, and it speaks for itself. I'm not gonna go any further than that, but it speaks for itself. That is one of the ones for me that resonates, and it, on a whole lot of different levels. So, being that executive assistant to the CEOs and the VPs of operations for these major top 25, top 50, corporations and stuff, and seeing all of the behind the scenes politics that goes on in corporate America and things of that nature, and to see how so many of our people of color, our women, our Black men, how they are just negated until it gets to a point where you have to pay attention to what's being said by them. You're in front of all of these people, you're taking credit for all of this, but you can't answer any of the simple questions. So rather than you just bring the person that's responsible to the table, you're gonna turn around and present the information, but you have none of the oomph to put with what you have on that presentation in front of you, on that on that screen, or whatever the case may be. So for me, that is one of my primary lessons that jumped out. And I want to say, because we kind of hit at it, and Ms. Cassandra, what I'm going to do is I'm going to toss the floor to you to allow you the opportunity to talk about your particular lesson that, kind of jumps out most for you from this book. But then I also want to kind of hit what we kind of talked about. Okay, all of these lessons are great, but where do we go from here? What next? So, Ms. Cassandra.
So I agree with Alfreda that the lessons change based on where I am and what season in my life or in my career I'm walking through. And so the one that has been pretty consistent, at least in my life, is when you think you figured out the rules, then they change the rules. Or when you master the game, then they change the rules. And to the what's next, first of all, what's next is everyone should buy the book and buy a copy for a friend that that you think might need some learning with apparently humor. I didn't find it funny as I was writing it, but I don't know if people take my sarcasm for humor, but a couple of people have said that it's funny. And I'm like, okay, I wasn't trying to be funny, but maybe it's sarcasm. I don't know. So it's not a hard read. You're not reading an academic discussion with 15 footnotes and words you got to Google and all that. It's not that. It's an easy read. So that would be step one for a follow-up. Buy the book or buy the ebook. And if I told you who we were trying to take over in Amazon world, we should all buy the ebook, but I'm not going to name names. But let's just say there's a person in the #1 spot who doesn't actually know she's Black, but she's in the category of Black people with Amazon. So just buy the ebook so we can knock her out of the #1 spot. And then, one of the things, I was having this conversation in a meeting today, what I would love to see is very specific systemic changes in whatever your circle looks like. So whenever I post on my business page or on my author page, I always hashtag, what systemic impact are you making? Because if you're in a system, whatever that system is, you have the ability to make a change, even if it's a small systemic change. So we worked with a high school where my oldest daughter now attends. They were our client before I was a parent there. And we worked with them years ago. They were a client. And they've now made some very specific changes around not only the curriculum that they read, but how they tell the stories to families before they get ready to do an activity, right? It's about front loading. If you're about to have a really complicated conversation and you're about to read James Baldwin in high school, you need to front load that. You can't just drop James Baldwin into high school English. I'm glad you're reading it, but you need to do some work ahead of time. And so that's a very specific systemic change that organization made because they saw things differently. So I'm not saying I want people to change the world overnight, but there is probably something that you can do in whatever your circle of influence is. If someone's voice is not being heard, they feel invisible. So make a point to make sure that voice is heard, because whatever they said in that meeting that someone else repeated and then became golden, that they now feel invisible because their voice wasn't heard. So that's what I hope is the what next. Now, if they're going to be book club conversations and all that, that's great. But what I really want is, I believe I would not do the work I do if I didn't believe that systemic change was possible. I think it is. I think people have to have desire to do it, and then it could happen. It would be great if we all saw it, but maybe we don't, right? So the experience my daughter had in 4th grade has shaped the experience that Janetta's daughter is having in 4th grade, because, you know, I had to go there, and now hopefully that conversation doesn't have to be had by Janetta for her daughter in 4th grade. So I don't necessarily know that it happened, but for our conversation. So hopefully that's what I would love for next steps to be. Everybody buy the book, and then go make something. Don't just sit there and talk about it. There's so much work that can be done.
Well, we're going to set up a something to make some things happen, because for me, I would love to hear the vantage point of our white counterparts. Deliberately hear the vantage points of our white counterparts, male and female, and not just white, but just other brown and black people, but specifically, our white counterparts, after they've had the opportunity to read the book and to see how it has impacted their mindset and the way they view things, and to hear, okay, what am I going to do differently from this point, now that I have read this and have a better understanding of some of the things that I've been doing, sometimes deliberately and sometimes not so much. So, and so what I'm going to do before we completely wrap up and get out of here, I'm going to ask our wonderful, wonderful guests if they would kind of give a quick synopsis of what this book has, I know we kind of talked about it in the beginning, but kind of why they feel someone should actually purchase this book and read this book and apply these lessons from a magical unicorn.
Apply them.
And it doesn't matter whichever lady decides that they want to start.
Well, I will start. It was interesting because, once COVID hit and then we had, the civil unrest, I actually had a friend, white person asked me, she said, I want to talk to you about something. I'm like, okay, well, what is it? And she said, have I ever offended you in any way? Now, this is somebody I've worked with for, 15 years. And I was that one black friend at that moment. And she said, have I ever offended you in any way? And to be honest, I couldn't really remember anything except for when she would say girlfriend. And I'm like, don't do that. But, but I want them to read it to understand our experience, understand why we're guarded, understand how they contribute knowingly or not knowingly, and to read specifically the section or the lesson about being an ally. Can you identify yourself as having been an ally to someone? You know, we all have had allies in our lives. And I think that that's the key, because I don't think they know what to do. It's not about what you say. It's not about just having someone at your table for them to be at the table. It's not about just posting about, you know, diversity and whatnot, but what have you done specifically? You know, how can you be an ally? How can you take at least one of those lessons and apply it and be intentional about it? Maybe you purchase a book that is by a Black author that has Black characters for your children or someone else's, whatever it is. But that, for me, is for that experience and understanding, and how can they transform at least one of those lessons. And I think the ally is critical. And honestly, that is the piece for them to really get it. So once you get those outer pieces and then that ally, that's where you use that vehicle to make the change in your sphere.
Miss Alfreda.
Okay, for myself, I think one of the things the book has done for me is to make me more resolved. Because, you know, after a while you get tired of working in the fields and the vineyards, you know. And so the book kind of renewed things for me. Even as I retire and I'm looking at ways to kind of reimagine myself moving forward, because I don't see myself just sitting down doing nothing, you know. I've never been that person. But to reimagine for myself and to be more resolved about continuing this journey and this battle, because it's not over. You know, we can look at our world until it's not over. So how do I do that? And to be more resolved, to not get tired, weary, and well-doing. And also to be able to help mentor. I've always done my best to try to be a mentor to other Black women. And when I started being in leadership positions, to be able to, you know, as Cassandra says, to make sure that we leave it a lot browner than when we got there, but also to encourage people to go further. You know, I want to be able to look back and count all the people that I have helped to mentor and where they are now and what they're reaching for. And so this has resolved me to help them continue to build the tools that they need. Because a lot of times I get calls back from these same young women saying the same things, that they're tired, you know, this is what's happening. And so this book is something that I can give to them to tell them, you need to read this, and this is why this is happening to you. So to kind of use this in my toolkit, if you will, to be able to each one reach one and teach one, to kind of help those that are coming behind us. We're standing on the shoulders of people, and I want to be a strong shoulder for people to stand on. So I agree with all the systemic things, but if we don't continue to build warriors, then we're not going to be, it doesn't matter what we do with the systems if we don't have people to continue to be the voices for us. And I think a lot of time we've got this generational loss of voices. They don't know what they're doing. You know, they don't know how to vote. They don't know what voting means. You know, they say all these things. It's like, that's not the way that works. You know, it's not like that. You know, so especially in the world of social work, which can be, everybody knows everybody. And, you know, you talked about corporate, but when you work in not-for-profits and public service, your name is the only thing you've got, you know? And so helping them to be able to know their name, build their name, and stand on their name. And having these lessons will kind of help them to be able to do that. So that when they walk, like Janetta said, into the meeting, they're able to shift the table. They're able to not only just talk at the table, but to be able to know how to shift that table. Where you sit in the room has everything to do with where the power is. You know, people think it's at the front of the head of the table. It's in the middle of the table. So that way you can see everybody. So giving them those lessons kind of grounded in the lessons that Cassandra has given is where I kind of see my next step going.
That is phenomenal. And I was sitting here while we, been chatting it up this evening, and I was just like, she is full of so much wisdom. And it was just like, it was so funny. It was like, and then for you to climax what you were saying, with the mentoring aspect of things, because I was just sitting here and I was listening to the different things saying, and I was like, she is full of so much wisdom. Oh my goodness. She is full. So Cassandra, you are surrounded by some phenomenal women.
So let me tell the rest of the story as we close, because I got to get a beverage to get ready to watch the debate.
What you just said.
When Alfreda first met me, she and another colleague, when I thought I was in charge of a space, and I went to the head of the table in that particular room and thought I was, I'm like, okay, I have the title, so certainly they're going to do what I say. So she and another friend of ours, a dear friend of the Dining Divas, looked at each other and said to each other, do we like her? And they both decided they did not. And but they were going to take me out to lunch, and they did. And I think there's a lot to be said for appreciating the amazing people that God has put in your life. And Alfreda has been, aside from a mentor, she's been a dear sister. So she was really the only person outside of our family that read the book when it was in rough draft form. And I asked her to, because I was like, does this make sense to anybody other than my family? Because it makes sense to us, but I want to know if it makes sense to other people. And that was a lot of, to go from we don't like her to I trust you enough to read my what I was calling a memoir, but apparently my publisher told me it's not a memoir. It's just an educational tool. So I'm like, okay, if you say so. So that's always the running joke amongst the group is they didn't like me at first because I thought I knew a lot more than I did. So, to be open to people pulling your coattail and saying, hey, sit down. There's always that.
Well, it wasn't quite that hard.
You're willing to,
and I will credit our other friend who said there's too few of us for us in social work, for us not to be getting along and having each other's back. So we're going to invite her to lunch and we're going to sit down and talk. And from there has been more than almost a 20-year.
I know, because Lauren is
Janetta,
16, and it was before that. So
yeah. And Janetta the same way. I've known Janetta though since she was a little bitty baby going to graduate school. So she's one of our success stories. So, and then we always all work together on different projects and things, supporting each other.
Yes.
Well, I want to say thank you to all of you for not just coming on to discuss the book, but to discuss this thing called life, which is basically what this book talks about.
Exactly.
Life as that one Black friend. And, and I want to say thank you. And I'm grateful that you all have been placed in my path, because I don't believe in coincidence. And I am truly grateful that God saw fit to put you all in my path through Cassandra. So thank you all for coming to this thing called life. Miss Cassandra, thank you. And for those of you that are always wondering who I bling from,
yeah.
We bling with Miss Cassandra, and you know, we appreciate you. We love you. And Key, is there anything else that you want to say before we wrap up?
No.
Okay, well, we will see you all next Tuesday.
Yes.
On this thing called life. Take care, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.